Article 1, Section 2, Jerry Neville. If you're so smart, why aren't you rich? That's what people always used to ask Jerry Neville's father, a Fields Medal-winning professor of mathematics. Like his father, Neville was brilliant, breezing through school and effortlessly acing every examination put in front of him. His classes, meant for students far duller than he was, bored him. None of those academic successes ever satisfied the young Neville. What had such achievements gotten his father? A middle-class life, the hassles of academic committee meetings, an average life with an average wife who left him after 20 years of marriage. That was not the future Neville desired. Wealth was the ticket to what he really wanted. Status, admiration, the look of fear in his competitors' eyes, a relationship with a woman of his choice that would last exactly as long as he wanted it to. That was the road to happiness. In high school, Neville turned down the chance to go to the International Mathematics Olympiad, a competition that would pit him against the cream of the world's young math talent. Rather than battling half a dozen future Fields Medal winners in math contests, Neville studied the stock market and mastered computer programming. By the time he applied to college, Neville was writing programs to analyze securities to take advantage of the dot-com boom of the late 1990s and early 2000s. So perspicacious was his analysis that he got his small but growing nest egg out of technology stocks before the boom went bust. Many professional investors were ruined. Neville was not. By the time he got into Harvard, Neville had a feel for developing internet technology and for the steps necessary to bring those technologies to a mass market. Bao Chen, his statistics professor, wrote him a 5-word recommendation to graduate school at MIT. This man is a genius. By the time he started at MIT, he had gotten his first social media company off the ground. He found graduate coursework so easy that he was able to start the company while taking on a full academic load. When the internet first came to public attention in the 1990s, it was a wild west of information and imagination. It lowered barriers to interaction, connecting people to ideas and to others they never would have encountered otherwise. The teeming, chaotic mess was impossible for anybody to control until the first decade of the 2000s. Neville and his competitors found a way to corral users' interactions into the walled garden of social media. Neville entered the social media market with Chirp, a centralized message board. There, users would exchange short messages called chirps and update each other on the latest news, trends, and humor. Products touted by the users with the most followers quickly became wildly popular. Their views on the issues of the day gained mainstream acceptance at blinding speed. Soon, ad revenue was flooding in, and investors were clamoring for Neville to take their money and multiply it. Neville's competitors in social media technology were focused on their websites and improving their user experience. Most of these naive young programmers realized just how lucky they had been when their IPOs made them into newly minted billionaires. They hardly noticed that Neville was on the hunt. While Neville did not ignore his website or his users' experiences, the day-to-day management of Chirp soon began to bore him. Chirp was too small a platform for his growing ambition. He prepared for war. A tectonic shift in U.S. politics provided Neville with his opportunity to strike. That change was the growing reward for getting and wielding political power. The most notable cases were former presidents Henry Lowell and Darnell James. Both of these men had done nothing in their lives other than use their charm to win votes from an adoring public. Neither of them had particularly successful presidencies. Favorable coverage in the corporate press and influence peddling after leaving office meant that they each lived like idle billionaires in their post-presidential careers. State and local politicians were cashing in too, perhaps less munificently, but they were certainly living the high life. At first, Neville watched the politicians as a way to manage risk. As Neville's wealth and power grew, it began to attract the attention of the politicians, the bureaucrats, and the regulators. Neville found ways to serve the politicians. In return, the politicians took Neville's side, rather than plundering his wealth. Neville found that politicians' moves were easy to anticipate. Like greed for money, lust for power made their actions predictable. Often, those actions were predictably stupid. Once in office, politicians at all levels of government would not risk missing out on the rewards of power by being stingy with the money confiscated from the taxpayers. When Congress couldn't tax or borrow the trillions necessary to pay for lavish benefits, they printed it. Newly created dollars began to appear on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet by the trillion. Like high-pressure steam in a boiler, all those trillions of dollars had to go somewhere. Neville realized that traditional investments would be priced beyond all reason. Instead of paying insane prices for sane investments, the institutions that controlled the big money would start buying investments that no sane investor would have touched just a short time before. If you're so smart, why aren't you rich? That question now amused Neville, rather than annoying him. Smart and money don't always go together. In fact, where there's an incredible amount of money, there's always an incredible amount of stupid. One thing was certain. A very large number of very stupid people were going to get very rich. The stupid would get far richer, far faster than the smart people who didn't gamble their money. But like all gamblers, these newly rich speculators would eventually lose it all. They always do. Neville carefully positioned himself to pick up the pieces. When the Federal Reserve opens the sluice gates and floods the market with oceans of money, price loses all connection to value. Neville's schemes had one thing in common: create assets. Any assets at all. Whatever the actual value, the assets he created could sell for some price. Get that price moving in the right direction, and investors would buy the asset without a further thought to its value. Everest Capital was Neville's ace in the hole. The gargantuan fund passively managed $10 trillion in assets. Money in amounts that massive was as hard to move as a fund's namesake mountain. The fund simply bought the assets that made up the market. Even companies that no sane investor would buy were on Everest Capital's balance sheets. All Neville had to do to get Everest to buy and hold the publicly traded assets he created was simply to create them. Neville's first public offering of stock to build his war chest was for Giorgiani's, a dilapidated New York City pizzeria. It had only one location in Brooklyn. By New York City standards, the pizza Giorgiani served was often described as disappointing. Yet Neville offered the corporation that owned the eatery onto the market. The Fed's massive money printing, combined with Everest Capital's asset allocation strategy, did its magic, boosting the total value of the pizzeria's shares to $110 million. As Neville's reputation on Wall Street grew, he turned to creating SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies. These were shell companies that had the sole purpose of raising money in an initial public offering of shares. The SPACs had no commercial operations. They made no products. They sold nothing. Their assets were limited to the funds Neville had raised in the initial public offering. The money raised would be used to buy other companies. Neville liked SPACs because it minimized his hassles with the Securities and Exchange Commission. For a typical IPO, the SEC does not permit the company issuing the shares to forecast future revenues and earnings. In a SPAC, the issuing company is permitted to project the rosiest of futures for investors. That Neville's future was the only truly rosy one had a remarkably small impact on his reputation. Neville's first SPAC was called Platinum Holdings Corp. As an investment, Platinum Holdings wasn't any more sane than Giorgiani's pizzeria was, but investors duly bought it. So did Everest Capital and a number of other big retirement funds. The soon-to-retire workers whose employers had invested their savings in the funds might not have approved. Each of the many retirees lost only a small sum. If they even noticed their losses, they would blame Wall Street in general, not Neville in particular. Neville used the first fruits of his SPAC creation activities to buy Picture This, the photo and video sharing social network. Other small to medium-sized social media companies followed Picture This onto the menu. Thumbtack, the pinboard-based social network for sharing ideas, was next. Then came Buzz, a voice-over IP service. Neville would next get into the business of helping professionals network and post their job offerings and CVs when he bought out ProNet. After that, potential customers could review those businesses on Neville's newest acquisition when he bought out Howl, the crowdsourced business review service. Several other video live streaming companies were next. The last social media survivor was Reach Out, the social networking behemoth. Max Zaleski, the founder of Reach Out, did not worry. His market capitalization was 50 times the total value of Neville's entire stable of social media firms. A few SPACs wouldn't do much to help the minnow swallow the whale. Zaleski began to fret when Neville started to tout investments to the retail market. Famous for his wealth, small investors listened to Neville's advice and hoped to imitate his moves on the road to riches. At first, Neville would hype various stocks and even cryptocurrencies, and their price would rise. When he expressed his cooling enthusiasm, the prices of these assets cooled as well. Neville arranged to profit from whatever advice he chirped to the retail investment communities. Those who took his advice were seldom as lucky. When Neville expressed doubts about Reach Out as an investment, Reach Out's market capitalization fell to only 40 times the total value of Neville's companies. Neville realized that the money needed to buy Reach Out could be had merely by selling high-yield junk bonds to his contacts in China. These were the kinds of bonds that were used to finance the great leveraged buyouts of the 1980s. Chinese investors were eager to find a place to park their own trillions of US dollars. Even better, the Chinese would hardly care how long it took Neville to pay them back. In return for financing his ambitions, he would owe them favors. Neville was about to have a nearly unlimited amount of data about American social media users. He would be in a position to do the kinds of favors that the Chinese government wanted. Financing his ambitions with money supplied by the USA's biggest global competitor would certainly set off national security alarm bells. Neville hired consultants who would set up sham retirement funds. These American corporations would funnel the Chinese dollars into Neville's high-yield bonds. With that complete, Reach Out would be his. What his competitors called monopolization, consolidation, or a massive breach of U.S. antitrust law, Neville called integrating user experience across multiple platforms. User data was centralized onto his massive farms of servers. Still not satisfied, Neville set his eyes on the rich hordes of data that Antares, the world's largest search engine, had in its own servers. The search giant had more than 80 times the value of all of Neville's companies put together. Buying it out was not realistic. But when Neville asked to share its data, the search colossus did not want to risk whatever surprises Neville's financial wizardry could produce. It duly coughed up the data as soon as Neville asked. The company's server farms were wired together into what the two firms called a strategic partnership. His empire in order, it was now time for Neville to attend to what he called unfinished business. Article 1, Section 3, Examination Hall, Shanghai, China, 4 years before Election Day. Mei Hua Chang had spent 10 of her 18 years preparing for those 2 June days. In addition to the 2 hours she spent each day practicing classical piano, she was coached every day after school to prepare for what she would have to do on those days. She and nearly all of China's high schoolers would take the Gaokao exam. For centuries, China has used fiendishly difficult written examinations to select its elite. Most famously, the emperors tested would-be scholar bureaucrats in the Confucian classics with the legendary civil service exam. The Gaokao can be called the modern-day equivalent. Rather than a demonstration that a student has learned the material she was taught in school, certifying her fit to graduate, the exam is the way that China ranks 10 million graduating high schoolers. Each student is awarded a 3-digit number to indicate her score on the exam. a score that is the one thing that will determine her acceptance at university. The Gaokao tests a dizzying lineup of subjects, including Chinese, math, a foreign language, usually English, various sciences, and rounds it all off with essay questions on history, geography, and politics. City governments divert traffic away from testing centers while the nervous students struggle away. Police patrol the streets outside to keep passersby quiet. So immense is the pressure inside the testing hall that ambulances wait nearby to revive the students who collapse from the nervous tension. The mathematics itself was on par with that tested in other countries. Mei Hua's years of study equipped her with all the techniques needed to solve all the questions. But the problems were tricky in that they took many steps to solve correctly. Worst of all was that she was competing with nearly 10 million other students. Any mistake in any of the steps of a complicated calculation meant being passed over by thousands, possibly tens of thousands of competitors. And indeed, Mei Hua noticed most, but not all, of the traps set by the test designers. The first time she fell into one, her ranking sank. The next time it happened, her ranking plummeted. Mei Hua's was an excellent performance, especially on the sections that tested English language proficiency. Her 3-digit score was among the best in the country. The top-tier universities that truly open the doors to better employment and to a better life, however, could only accept fewer than one student in 50,000. Near the top is a far different proposition than at the top. For Mei Hua, the best Chinese schools, Tsinghua University and the University of Peking, were out of the question. She would have to settle for Harvard University in the United States. Unlike the Chinese schools, which selected solely based on exam scores, Mei Hua's family connections easily got her past Harvard's gatekeepers. Article 1, Section 4. CHIRP Headquarters, 3 years before Election Day. Ambassador Shen Hong was getting impatient. His briefcase did not contain enough paperwork to occupy the hour he had spent in the waiting room outside of Jerry Neville's office. At first, Hong occupied himself by admiring Rembrandt's The Raising of Lazarus that adorned the south wall, and then Holbein's portrait of a young woman that hung on the eastern. The Chinese ambassador was not accustomed to being kept waiting. Hong wasn't about to bring good news to Neville. Perhaps Neville knew this and was busy preparing for a negotiation. Eventually, Hong returned to the sofa and pulled out his phone to check the status of his flight back to Washington. Returning his phone to his pocket, he pulled out his ballpoint pen and began rhythmically clicking it open and shut. At length, the oak door of Neville's office opened. Hong stood up, carefully smoothing his tailored suit before approaching to offer a handshake. In his late 30s and balding, Neville was far shorter than Hong had anticipated. The stocky diplomat was not noted for his height, but the tech billionaire was half a head shorter than Hong. Neville's upper body and legs were strikingly thin. His midsection was beginning to bulge and soften. He was dressed in sweatpants and a ratty t-shirt. "Why don't you come in?" Neville said. Neville led Mr. Hong into the office and gestured to the left, where his large wooden desk lay in wait. Surrounding the desk, framed diplomas and honors cheered their owners' past feats of academic prowess. Neville sat himself behind his desk and invited Hong to sit at one of the 3 thinly upholstered wooden chairs that faced the desk. Hong carefully examined Neville's face. Neville evidently did not know the purpose of Hong's visit. He looked too calm for that. Having been kept waiting long enough, Hong was glad that Neville had no interest in small talk. He got right to the point. "Surely, you are a busy man." "Yes, Ambassador Hong, I am a very busy man." "You certainly must be. I can only wonder why somebody who owes China so much money would keep the Chinese ambassador waiting so long." "I have a lot to offer your government. I think that the accommodation we have come to is fair." "I think you overestimate how useful you are to our government. At this point, we might need to collect on our bonds." "The agreement we have in place gives you access to a world of data about America and its citizens." "Your data is now surplus to our requirements." Neville remained still, but Hong noticed him swallow. Hong reasoned that Neville must be wondering how China found a substitute for the data he had until recently provided. Neville knew better than to expect an answer. Hong didn't expect Neville to abase himself by asking. "There is no reason to worry, Mr. Neville. We know that your corporation does not have the funds to pay what it owes, but we have no wish to put you out of business. We believe that there is a path to joint prosperity. And what is that? You can share some of your research with us. What research is that, Mr. Hong? It goes all the way back to the work you did while you were at MIT. What work would that be? How familiar are you with China and the Chinese government? Somewhat. Are you familiar with the Chinese phrase, the mandate of heaven? Yes, but wasn't the mandate a divine blessing that the emperors required to rule? China got rid of the emperors more than a century ago. What does it have to do with China today? The last emperor abdicated in 1912. Years of chaos and violence followed as numerous warlords took over China. Then, in 1949, Mao Zedong established the People's Republic of China. Just like the emperors of old, he put an end to the warlords and to years of bloodshed. Our current leader is, in a very real sense, part of the dynasty that Mao established. Today, he is very much China's emperor. If I get your meaning, you seem to want me to provide to your new emperor the mandate of heaven? Yes, at least something that looks very much like the mandate of heaven. How do you expect me to do that? We Chinese realize that while our civilization lasts forever, its governments are passing arrangements. One dynasty establishes peace over the chaos. If that dynasty ever weakens, the Chinese people are happy to sweep it into the dustbin of history with a bloody rebellion. The chaos that follows is always very ugly. So, your regime is unstable? No. Chairman Yu is a strong and effective leader. But who comes after him? What problems will the future bring? That we cannot predict. We must be ready for whatever comes. Okay, Neville said. Then why did you come out here to see me? Mr. Neville, would I be correct if I said that you have degrees from MIT in behavioral psychology and computer science? Yes. You have doctorates in both of those, right? Yes. In fact, you wrote one doctoral dissertation that covered both subjects. Yes. I guess then I should call you Dr. Neville. Neville continued to regard Hong with that same impassive gaze. At MIT, you wrote a doctoral dissertation with the title, The Implementation of Machine Learning for the Actuation of Preferred Behavioral Patterns, correct? Yes. Chairman Yu has implemented a pilot program that has attempted to put your paper into practice. I see. There's a problem. You know what they say. In theory, there's no difference between practice and theory. In practice, there is, Neville said. Ambassador Hong watched as Neville laughed at his own joke. We keep rereading your paper, looking for solutions to the problems that have cropped up. We can't find anything that works. What are these problems? You are not ready to hear the answer to that question yet. Why not? You have not yet asked the question. What problem are we trying to solve with your program? What problem is that? Our vision for the Chinese future requires unity, Dr. Neville. We need all of China to pull together to bring our nation to our glorious future. The problem is dissent. You mean people who don't act and think the way your government wants them to? Neville asked. You make that sound like a trivial matter. I assure you, it is not. You would realize that if you knew the history of China. I know a bit. China has had an advanced civilization all through those centuries when Europe was nothing more than a backwater. China invented gunpowder, the compass, paper, the printing press. You are correct. For even the best educated Westerners, that is all they know about the history of our country. The rest is a closed book. But if you would open that book, you would find, along with the great achievements of our civilization, giant wars. Wars on a scale that did not reach Europe until modern times. Wars in which Chinese people died in their millions. As Neville searched his memory, hoping to find examples, Hong began providing them. The Yellow Turban Rebellion killed around 5 million people. The Anlushan Rebellion around 13 million. The Taiping Rebellion between 30 and 50 million dead. And it goes on and on. Many of these rebellions started off as provincial uprisings by obscure religious sects. They went on to engulf all of China in war and threaten entire dynasties. You can see why China needs to prevent such outbreaks in future. Do you not? I can. So we nip such rebellions in the bud. Even still, the international community does not understand. They do not know our history. They do not know why China needs to do what China needs to do. Ignorant as they may be, they have no problem weeping and wailing about how we deal with Falun Gong or the Uyghurs. It's nauseating. Not to put too fine a point on it, you put the Falun Gong and the Uyghurs in concentration camps, don't you? Re-education camps. And you'd rather not do that, Neville suggested. We'd rather not have to do that. That reminds me of a joke, Neville grinned. Ambassador Hong sighed. What's your joke? What do you tell a woman with 2 black eyes? What? Nothing. You've already told her twice. Ambassador Hong watched Neville laugh at his own joke once again. After a moment, he sensed an opening. He began laughing with Neville. Exactly, said Ambassador Hong. If a woman loves you, she'll do what you want purely out of love. But if she falls out of love with you, all the force in the world won't get her to obey for long. For our party and our government, the same principle applies, just on a larger scale. I see. So rather than nip the problem of rebellion in the bud, we think it's best that there never even be a bud that needs nipping. That's why you're using my research? Yes. So you want to get Chinese citizens to do what the government wants and think the way the government wants them to think, and you want to do it by using my technology to actuate preferred behaviors? Yes. Have you actually tried to use an artificial intelligence program to persuade many citizens one at a time, as I suggest in my paper? We started a pilot program in the inland city of Chongqing and the surrounding regions. What did you do? We first assessed public opinion in the city by monitoring internet activity. To make sure we had an accurate assessment, we made it known that there would be complete freedom of speech on selected platforms. Using the data we got from citizens' internet usage, we tasked our computers with figuring out what messages would prove most persuasive to each individual citizen. We then sent those messages and watched the results. What happened then? Neville asked. In general, we were very pleased. Expressions of loyalty to our government and party increased dramatically. Yet you're coming to me for help. Yes. As you know, we want each and every one of our citizens to be their best for China and for the party, freely and voluntarily. Most of the time, the interventions suggested by your research were successful. I feel like there's a but coming. There is. And what's the but? Neville asked. But sometimes what happens is that a citizen would see something in the outside world that contradicts the message we send online. Then they feel like their eyes have been opened. At that point, we can't reach them any further with your methods. Nor can we get their patriotic friends to persuade them back to loyalty. Often, we're faced with the unfortunate necessity of putting such people into re-education camps. That's a real pity, Neville noted. Rather than loyal friends persuading dissidents, the dissidents are more successful in persuading the once loyal citizens. What is it you say in America? One bad apple spoils the bunch. Is that it? Or have there been other ways that my program has disappointed you? As it turns out, there is another way. We can't predict just who will be affected permanently by your interventions and who will fall away. I see. So that is our problem. The good news for you is that when the problem is fixed, our Chairman Yu will have a nation full of loyal citizens. No dissent. He will be the first Chinese leader that can truly be said to have the mandate of heaven. Good for him. And Chairman Yu will reward you by foregoing his collection efforts that would otherwise put you out of business. We will prosper together. Hong studied Neville's reaction, looking for some indication of gratitude, or at least relief. He found none. China has many tech companies, Neville noted. Why not have one of them develop this project? There are a few reasons. First, we do not want our corporations to become too powerful. Any entity with too much power is a threat to the party. We can let the tech companies get big, but not too big. Okay, said Neville. Second, we cannot trust them with technology like the kind we're asking you to design. Only the party must control that. Because it would make whoever holds that technology too powerful? Neville suggested with a smile. Yes. What do you think a Chinese tech company will do if they know the Chinese government will always give them lucrative contracts to find a solution to our problem? You mean, what would I do in their place? Yes. I would make sure the solution is always very close, but just out of reach. This way, I could keep getting the next contract. That's why we're coming to you. For you, the future of your entire company depends on getting the solution right once and for all. So, we can trust you to do your best in a way we can't trust our own companies. Hong saw Neville swallow hard, though he tried to hide it. Hong paused for a while before speaking again. Have you ever put the ideas in your paper into action? Hong asked. Have you ever designed a working prototype to persuade people to do things they otherwise might not do, using your artificial intelligence programs? Not on any sort of scale. So you've done this on a small scale? Hong asked. We've begun a few proof-of-concept experiments. When do you anticipate getting results? I'm hoping it won't be long. Couple of weeks. Months, maybe. Will you let me know if it succeeds? I don't think I'll have to. I would guess that a look at the celebrity gossip magazines will tell you all you need to know, said Neville. Celebrity gossip magazines? Yes, Neville replied. I'm not getting the sense that the type of behavior you're trying to actuate in your proof-of-concept experiments is quite the type of behavior that China is interested in eliciting from its dissidents. It's somewhat similar. What is it you said before about what a woman would do if she loves you? Hong smiled. Persuasion is persuasion, Neville said. Do you think you can extend whatever success you get in your proof of concept to address our problems with your technology? Yes. How long do you think it would take? Going by my previous work, I think it'll take something like 2 or 3 years. Getting it to work on any sort of scale will take even longer. Do you suppose that your work could even be scaled to address a population the size of China's? I suppose, but you would need to run it on a system with more computing power than exists in the world today. China will have all the computing power you need in 5 or 6 years. I will need a whole lot more before that. Can you get it to me? No. You have to rely on your own resources. China has invested enough in you already, Dr. Neville. Human behavior is extremely complicated. The kinds of algorithms we're going to need to run this program will take computing power that this corporation does not even have. To get it up to any sort of scale will take billions in investment. Seems to me you have a problem, Dr. Neville. Ambassador Hong smiled as he watched Neville's brow furrow. Worst of all, we will need to make sure that we have the right government in the USA. Foreign technology transfers are legally problematic, especially the transfer of a technology that can do what you want it to do. Are you saying you won't develop and furnish it? No. I'm saying that if I am to do so, I would need to be sure that we have a cooperative government in the U.S., one that would make sure the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission ignores the national security implications of the transfer. That would be a bridge to cross when we come to it. That's easy for you to say. You're not investing the billions that it would take to develop this technology. I am confident that bridge can be crossed. And I am confident that I can develop a system to permanently actuate the behaviors you want. Good. The next time we meet, I'm hoping you can show us some progress. I'm also hoping you will show some respect for my valuable time. Second chances are not always this easy to come by. That is the way forward to joint prosperity. If you fail, China will collect on its debts. You will be ruined. You just need to have some patience. Dr. Neville, our civilization is eternal. Didn't I tell you that? We're in a position to be patient. There are limits. Our patience is not eternal. This is Ari Mendelson. I hope you're enjoying Consent. I'd love it if you could show your appreciation for my years of hard work by hitting that like button and subscribing to my channel. But why keep this adventure to ourselves? I wrote Kingmaker because I believe its message of keeping control of our own minds is one that America needs to hear. Young men especially will profit from learning the message that lies at the heart of these novels, that the straightest path to happiness is by improving yourself, one step at a time, rather than attempting to change others. So, share this audiobook far and wide across your favorite social platforms. See the description below for other ways for you to support my work. Thank you so much for your time and attention.